Hello everyone and welcome this morning. My name is Alice Linahan and I am one of the directors of the Child Abuse in the Classroom initiative. And we are joined with our fellow moms and dads, grandparents in the great state of Indiana. They are also having a press conference today, and I would like to start this press conference by introducing a dear friend now in understanding the big issue of what's going on, Dr. Patrick Huff. And Dr. Huff is a retired educator of 34 years, and he saw firsthand the domination of testing in our public schools. Dr. Huff experienced this as a middle school and high school principal. He has a bachelor's degree from TCU here in Texas and a master's degree from Sam Houston State University, and and his doctorate from Prairie View A&M University in education leadership. And with the unrealistic mandates of No Child Left Behind, Dr. Huff was led to write The Takeover of Public Education in America, the agenda to control information and knowledge through the accountability system. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Patrick Huff.
Thank you, Alice. I appreciate that introduction. We are going to be talking about a very different type of topic today. Our focus is on a shocking title called Child Abuse in the Classroom. And that conjures up all types of mental images. So what we are going to present today is critical information that will clearly show the mental abuse that is taking place in the classrooms across the country, brought to us by the federal government that has allowed this to go forward, and also by the Texas state government that has allowed those provisions and implementations to be put into our Texas public schools. Now I'm going to try to give today some historical context to what will be later read to you in terms of the violations. Violations of civil rights that are taking place on our children that are brought to you by different laws that have been passed through the years. So when we talk about mental abuse happening in the classroom of our public schools today, what are we talking about? We're talking about the constant assessment that is taking place. We're talking about drilling, the testing strategies that are in place in the classrooms all across America. We're talking about the constant data collection that is taking place. And now we're talking about social and emotional learning that has now begun to be implemented through new Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills that have been brought into the classrooms by federal law. One of the areas of abuse that I do want to talk about for just a minute that's very important for us here in Texas is the fact that we have a law in Texas, House Bill 462, that outlaws Common Core. Well, Common Core is written into our teeth. It is embedded into our teeth. I was watching, I'm going to show you where it is in just a minute. I was watching the Senate hearings on adopting ESSA back in 2015, and Senator Lamar Alexander was expounding on how great it was that they were giving power back to the states. It was high time that we did that, according to Senator Alexander. No longer will states have to come to Washington and beg Congress to start a new program that might not be part of the federal law. The states will now be able to decide for themselves what course of action they wanted to take, and if they wanted to abandon Common Core, they could. So he was recognizing the fact that Common Core was throughout the land, but now with this new legislation, Common Core could be done away with in your state if your state education board so chose to do so. Well, let me give you an example how that is not the case. Back throughout the 2017 year and a little bit later in 2016, a number of people went before the State Board of Education. They were petitioning the State Board of Education to do away with what they call the process standards that are in math. And for those of you who are not familiar with what that is, it is what has just totally upended mathematics across the state and across the country. And it's the way that is mandated for it to be taught through Common Core. And expert witnesses were brought before the State Board of Education. Many people went before the State Board of Education giving expert testimony. But did they go back on that portion of Common Core that is the math process standards? No, they did not. They chose to keep them in place. And so the damage to the children will continue. And we have expert testimony that says that if a child is involved in this type of teaching of math for 4 years or more, they may never recover in their math skills. That's part of the mental abuse taking place in the classroom today. I want to read to you something that I think will be quite shocking to you. In 2015, this is an updated version of the application to receive the waiver that was written by Commissioner Williams in 2015. It was originally written in 2013. And of course, we hear from all the legislators that we do not have Common Core in Texas. Quit saying that. But the truth of the matter is, our TEKS, Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, has been merged with college and career ready standards. Now that's the language that was used originally. College and career ready standards to be the national standards that would go before the land. President Obama used that language, college and career ready standards. But here on page 14, if you want to pull up the waiver on your own, it is called the ESSA flexibility request submitted to the U.S. Department of Education, September 16, 2015. And on page 14, Commissioner Williams states, the Texas standards in English language arts and mathematics matched 92% and 75% of those in the Common Core standards. Not college and career ready standards, but the Common Core standards. So he spells it out right there. So please understand, this is part of the problem. We're getting lied to all the time. People want to know, well, why don't you trust the government? We get lied to by the government. That's why we don't trust them. And this is just a clear example of that. One of the other areas that we consider to be child abuse in the classroom is the introduction of social and emotional learning TEKS. The Commissioner of Education here in Texas went before the House and the Senate, and he promoted what he wanted to do in terms of a soft type of skills that would be implemented into the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, a non-academic type of program. And he called them soft skills. Well, this is what is termed social and emotional learning. And where does it come from? It comes from the federal law. This didn't come from our commissioner. This is not something that he wants to do because he considers it the right thing to do. This is coming from the federal law. It's taking place all over the country. So Texas, once again, is not Texas education, it's federal education. Another area that we want to touch on is in data collection. Many schools now across the country do not use textbooks. They use an electronic device. Some of them are, one of the most popular ones is a Chromebook. That has replaced textbooks. And some people like it. A lot more convenient just to carry around a Chromebook than it is to lug around a bunch of textbooks that might weigh 100 pounds. But the problem here is that every entry that is made and cataloged into the electronic device is creating a dossier on your child, and that will last forever. Every entry made, every opinion given, every topic talked about, every topic written about. Most upsetting is that the FERPA laws, this is going to be talked about in our violation section, the FERPA laws have been relaxed so that the privacy of the student is breached. That's very dangerous. So in the name of research now, third parties can get your child's information that has been logged into the electronic device. The promotion of data in the name of improving your child's performance on the state test is part of the new federal law. So there is no end in sight to what we are looking at right now. No one is taking any action to repeal ESSA. The accountability system that puts tremendous pressure on the child to pass the test continues. And along the way, the education becomes narrowed in the academic classes to which are linked to the test. Because the teacher's evaluation is linked to the outcomes of their students on the test, this is just about guaranteed that academic teachers now teach to the test. And think of all the information that is not being taught that used to be taught, that is now brushed aside because we have to make sure that we meet accountability. So let me state again, Texas education, as it is now, is federal education. And along the way, our children are being hurt and damaged. This is why we assemble today. We are providing information to arm you with knowledge to take back to your representative. We must have senators and representatives that will stand up and say no to the federal overreach in education. So today we push back against what we consider to be an agenda of child abuse in the classroom. All right, this is a prepared statement that is being read in other locations throughout the country. The Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, because it promotes child abuse in the classroom, citizens across the United States are prepared to wage an aggressive grassroots effort to stop it. Parents and citizens across the United States are requesting an immediate injunction to stop the implementation of social, emotional, and behavioral standards and interventions that have been codified in the Every Student Succeeds Act, passed and signed into law in December of 2015. Now, although the implementation of these non-academic standards and interventions have been previously approved and funded by former President Obama through the Executive Order 12866 and the illegal ESSA flexibility waivers, Congress has not stopped the progressive execution of these experimental psychological manipulations in the classrooms of America. Because our children are at risk of abuse, we are calling for an immediate investigation. The chairman of the HELP Committee, H-E-L-P, Senator Lamar Alexander, had purposely eliminated any reference in his summary reports that would disclose the illegal and dangerous psychological techniques codified in his ESSA education legislation. So citizens now know that Senator Alexander had been informed of the abuse of mental health interventions, and he permitted to be incorporated into his legislation anyway. We are asking that we publicly recant the language in his bill that opened the door to these abuses. We request his immediate resignation if he fails to act forthrightly to remedy this critical situation. President Trump has written and released an executive order that directs Secretary of Education DeVos to enforce statutory prohibitions on federal control of education. The Every Student Succeeds Act legislation violates the protection and safety of our children. This act requires the use of abusive psychological techniques on children. These techniques are actually codified into this law. We request that Secretary DeVos immediately prohibit the use of intrusive psychological and behavioral techniques named in the legislation on America's children in American classrooms. And I'll just inject here so that everyone understands. This is cross-party lines. This is a Democrat and a Republican problem. The intervention techniques specifically named in the legislation include applied behavioral analysis, posing as positive behavior interventions and supports, multi-tiered system of supports, which is response to intervention. School-wide tiered systems of supports, specialized instructional support, early intervening services for at-risk children or those who may be at risk for mental health disabilities. Our universal design for learning. You'll have to excuse me, my voice is beginning to fail. The following list of American citizens and parent grievances explains the wrongdoing through experimental research and psychological abuse that is currently being done to children in the classrooms across America. Let's talk about the Every Student Succeeds Act. It violates the privacy of our children and families. Our children are not a commodity. Currently, businesses and corporations in higher education are able to commercialize personally identifiable information, PII, into an invisible, lucrative empire obtained by secretly data mining information through discrete memorandums of understanding. This is not only highly unethical, but a violation of student and family privacy. The Every Student Succeeds Act violates our nation's families' constitutional protections, specifically the First and Fourth Amendment and the civil rights of all students that protect them from invasive psychological experimentation techniques and manipulative mind-bending methods. ESSA violates the personal liberties of our children through the illegal data collection of their psychological data, including the use of controversial techniques that manipulate the attitudes, values, beliefs, and dispositions. This private information collected on your vulnerable child is going into every state longitudinal data system and beyond. Data on our children is entered at the local level, thus creating a psychometric dossier that is digitally transferred to the Institute for Educational Sciences, a formidable national school board. Each child's personally identifiable information, their PII, is transferred and disclosed to third parties. Parents are not properly informed because this privacy invading process does not require parental permission. ESSA violates a student's freedom of conscience and religious freedom via the behavioral and affective molding of their minds by controversial concepts called the whole child. Parents have not been provided access to critical information about the full purposes, the exact definitions, or the algorithms. Parents are not being informed about what is really being measured through these affective standards, and what is being measured, what is being changed by these government-directed effective interventions, and what negative impact these enforced changes may have upon the personality, beliefs, and will of their children. Full disclosure has not been made to parents, nor are they aware how often these arbitrary subjective techniques are being implemented based solely on the need of their child to meet behavioral standards. These behavioral standards are subjective and vague and cannot be measured scientifically, objectively, or accurately. The algorithms are tied to government standards that are based on non-objective criteria. ESSA violates laws forbidding the federal government to nationalize education. Forced cookie-cutter methodologies and highly scripted psychological techniques are being imposed on children in the classroom, integrated and infused throughout the curriculum. Behavioral software and curricula is being formulated to meet the concrete objectives and exacting data elements of the state longitudinal data systems. Student data is being evaluated and collected through government-approved processes that both monitor and actually change the attitudes, values, beliefs, and dispositions of individual students to an established standard that is set by the government, not the parent. The child's progress toward meeting these government standards is monitored by the use of a unique national ID assigned to each child. This nationalized system violates the General Education Provisions Act, Section 524, prohibiting the federal government to supervise or direct curriculum. ESSA violates the safety of our children. It places our children in danger of being specifically psychological interventions named in the legislation. Experimental research on children is prohibited without informed written parent consent. Yet the impact of ESSA has transformed our neighborhood schools into school-based mental health centers. These medical models change the nature of education away from true academic excellence toward state-prescribed personality development. We assert this is not the purpose of education in a free society. ESSA violates constitutionally protected right of personal liberty, freedom of conscience, and the civil rights of our children by forcing them to undergo psychological, mental health interventions in the classroom under the guise of education. Now, these interventions intentionally mold a child's conscience and belief system toward government-determined, non-academic standards that cannot be objectively measured. We assert that the federal government has created and mandated specific behavioral outcomes and standards and proficiency levels for our children in violation of federal protection statutes. So we'll end that there in terms of the reading of the general press release. And at this time, I would like to introduce to the podium education researcher Lynn Davenport, and she will continue with the program.
Thank you, Pat. So Pat covered some of the violations in Every Student Succeeds Act, but I'm going to read them one by one. So first is data tracking. Collection of personally identifiable information on babies, children, and teachers identified excuse me, with a unique national ID. Contracted by Institute for Educational Sciences, that's NCES, in compliance with Obama's Executive Order 12866, creating state longitudinal data systems to collect and share data. Second is data trafficking. States release personally identifiable information to third-party contractors. State departments of education are able to enter into written agreements with businesses, foundations, higher education, and other departments releasing personally identifiable information. Because of the loopholes in FERPA, which is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, that redefine school officials. Personally identifiable information, womb to workforce data is given freely to third-party contractors, the written agreements contracted by each state Department of Education. Treatment, interventions, psychological abuse. ESSA mandates personally identifiable information collected on attitudes, values, behaviors, beliefs, and dispositions like grit, carried out by IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. All students birth through college age are identified under Title I for behavior change through Child Find. The NCES, which is the Institute for Educational Sciences, monitors and evaluates compliance with experimental research using a unique national ID. Privacy violations. Exchange and redisclosure of personally identifiable information continues, including data collected on attitudes, values, beliefs, and dispositions without the knowledge or consent of parents. Directory information is cross-referenced with behavioral data collected on the local level. Privacy protections have been removed. Data, the new currency, uses children as a commodity. These blatant data mining violations are child abuse. Violations of the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, PPRA. Violations under Title I school-wide through the use of psychiatric, psychological examination, assessment, evaluation, or testing. Psychiatric or psychological treatment and interventions deceptively used in the classroom without the knowledge, disclosure, or written permission of parents, while at the same time ESSA forbids mental health screening without consent. Civil rights violations. Interventions, treatment, and re-education of attitudes, values, dispositions, and beliefs of children are profound violations of First Amendment protections of our God-given right to right of conscience and the Fourth Amendment protection of our God-given right to be secure in their persons. Public Law 103 33. General Education Provisions Act, Section 438. Federal government is supervising and directing curriculum, creating a model national curriculum and a national test. Institute for Educational Sciences, which I mentioned earlier, NCES, evaluates and monitors students, teachers, funding, principals, schools, and states for mental health data. Malpractice, this is the last one. Malpractice and maltreatment of children and babies by teachers and preschool caregivers. Teachers and preschool caregivers exceeding their professional certifications are required to screen, evaluate, and perform anecdotal behavioral assessments, conditioning, and implement psychological remediation of the child's attitudes, values, beliefs, and dispositions to comply with global initiatives under ESSA, defined by the Department of Labor SCANS report, creating a process of supply chain management to humans. These violations have allowed for child abuse in the classroom. Thank you.
And I am going to take this time now to read a joint statement from the directors of child abuse in the classroom. Anita Hogue, Director of Research and Development, and I, Alice Linahan, have found the implementation of ESSA and the social, emotional data collection and behavioral interventions have not provided parents with rights under the law. We have found that our elected representatives are not protecting our children and grandchildren. We stand by our claim that ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, violates the privacy and freedom of our most vulnerable treasure, our children. Our commitment to protect our children can be heard today in press conferences, not only here in Austin, Texas, but also in Indiana, the home state of Vice President Pence and Congressman Okita. And we have 25 states involved in this initiative at this time. The authors of ESSA had never reported the embedded secret plan for Congress to pass psychological manipulation in an education bill forcing teachers and schools to become mental health practitioners. ESSA makes a mockery of the intent of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 that was created to help poor children learn to read. Parents insist on informed written consent and full disclosure of any psychological or behavioral mental health assessment or intervention that is being done in the classrooms of America, no matter what sugar-coated name that may be given to these psychological interventions. From the 1990s forward, Anita Hogue has been determined to protect the children of the United States. After filing a complaint under the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, the PPRA, the Pennsylvania Department of Education was forced to remove the psychological testing and the Educational Quality Assessment, the EQA. Pennsylvania's EQA was the national model for the nation's report card, the NAEP. EQA measured and scored attitudes, values, beliefs, and dispositions of our children and their families. How do you measure honesty, resilience, or grit? How is behavioral data tracked? ESSA federal law is attempting to do the exact same thing by implementing psychological interventions to change the attitudes, values, beliefs, and dispositions of our children. This was illegal in 1990, and it is illegal now. We say no. We intend to protect our children. Let us remind you, this is the United States of America. Our press release alleges legal violations, documenting that these violations are happening in Vice President Pence's home state of Indiana. Our documentation proves how the social, emotional, and behavioral standards and interventions were introduced into all classrooms in America. We are insisting that our elected officials, in their leadership capacity, stop the child abuse in the classroom. This is our legal challenge to ESSA. And I thank you for your time, and we need to let freedom ring here in America. We need to protect our children and our grandchildren. And I will hand it over to Dr. Pat Huff to close out our press conference.
Thank you, Alice, and I do want to take time to thank those who prepared the event today and the press conference taking place, and to all those people across the country that are taking part in watching it through their means that they have available to them. So where do we go from here? It is our belief that we need to have a vision. What is it we are working toward? So we must have a vision, but we know that in doing so, we are going to get opposition. We are disrupting the education reform agenda, and it is a very deep network. Congressmen, governmental agencies, corporations, businessmen and women working to support the reform agenda are not easily swayed to abandon the mission. We know that. So we must be armed with accurate knowledge. So our vision is for the children of Texas to one day that they will receive their right to a true, quality, rich education of information and knowledge from a teacher, not from a computer. The computer and electronic devices are good as an enhancement to the lesson, but they should never be used in place of the teacher. And that is what is taking place now. The accountability system must end. It must die. If we are to restore our educational institutions to their rightful place in our society, the accountability system must come to an end. As I have explained, it is built on fraud and deception. Schools cannot be declared winners and losers based on a matrix of test scores and other factors. The new A through F rating system is an affront to the education profession. Why every superintendent is not at the governor's door is beyond me. When an A stands for a school located in an affluent neighborhood, and D or F is for a school located in neighborhoods of poverty, if you don't call that discrimination, I don't know what you call it. This is all brought to you by the federal government and our state government laying down and allowing it to take place in the schools in Texas. The education reform agenda in the past 25 to 30 years is a globalist agenda. It does not have the best interest of the children at heart. Only that which can be measured is valued. If it can't be measured, it isn't valued. I believe the children of Texas deserve better than a globalist standard of education. So we need others to join us in our effort. We need more parents. We also need people in government to join us, whether they be members of the Congress or staff workers. We need you in this fight. We need educators to join us, teachers, counselors, principals, even superintendents, and board members of trustees. I know you will be leery of getting involved, educators. I understand your dilemma. You may think it may disrupt your ability to be promoted. You may even think it may result in your firing and disruption of your pension. But what's more important? Where we go from here with our educational system with the children, or a promotion to a job that just continues in that effort. Those are all real fears, but the time has come to stand up for what we believe. Never has it been so important. The monster called education reform is getting bigger with each passing year and each new bill. So let's all come together, let's work together, and let our voices be heard. So thanks to everyone who attended today, and we'll adjourn the meeting.